you. Welcome to another episode of Empower Apps. I'm your host, Leo Dian. Today, I am joined by Gio Lodi. Gio, good to see you.
Good to see you, Leo. Thank you for having me.
I did pronounce your name right, correct?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. I'm getting better at it. All right. So I'll let you introduce yourself and the book you have coming out pretty soon.
Yeah. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Gio. I am a testing enthusiast. At the moment, I'm working as a mobile infrastructure engineer at Automatic. You might not have heard of Automatic, but I'm pretty sure you've heard of some of the products that we work on, like WordPress.com, Tumblr, WooCommerce. And if you are a listener of the show, not too long ago, Aaron Douglas was a guest talking about offline syncing.
Yeah.
So you might be familiar with us already.
Yeah. So you're the second automatic guest on this show. Awesome. That's pretty great.
Yeah. We call ourselves automaticians. Automaticians.
Nice. Yeah. Do you mind saying what part of Automatic you work in?
Yeah, I work in the apps division. And as a mobile infrastructure engineer, I work across apps. My team builds the tools that help the other teams ship quality code on a schedule.
Gotcha. All right. So we're recording during WWDC week. So I have to ask, how many videos have you watched?
3.
Okay.
So I watched.
That's a very honest answer. Thank you.
Yeah. I have a long list of the ones that I want to watch, but I've been a bit busy with other things. So I just watched the State of the Union, the keynote, and then I just sort of skipped through the Xcode Cloud introduction.
Okay. Very cool. So in the last episode, I was talking with Peter about Xcode Cloud. That seems like a big deal as far as in the testing space is concerned. What have you, what's kind of your early thoughts on Xcode Cloud right now?
It is super exciting. I'm of two minds about it. I think if I put my indie or developer that works in a small team hat, maybe working only on Apple platforms, that could be a really, really appealing value added that Apple is providing, because now everything is integrated into Xcode, and we always have some trouble provisioning the machines in the cloud to run continuous integration and maintaining. And who can do that better than Apple? They have all the hardwares. They don't have licensing problems. They can put the betas straight away. If I recall correctly, they also run your test on betas already, if there might be an option to enable, but they can do all that for you. And it would be really helpful. At the same time, for a larger team, I think from what I've seen, it's hard to say without actually trying it. But I fear that it might be still a bit too green for a large team that has very refined automation workflows and they have share configuration across platforms. So I don't see it yet as a viable solution for larger teams. But happy to be proven wrong, and very keen to see what the folks that will get their hands on the beta soon will tell us.
Were you ever familiar with BuildBuddy at all before the purchase?
Although I never used it. I know that it was highly regarded as a great solution by many folks in the community that I respect and trust, but I never used it myself.
Do you know if they ever supported Android?
I have no idea.
Okay. If somebody in the audience knows that, please let us know, because I'm really curious about that. And also, it's interesting. Over the last few days, the opinion has I've heard the opinion that you've had, where it's like for indies, it's a good fit. but for enterprise, it might not be with existing infrastructure, which I find interesting because I would have thought the other way around. And the reason I say that is how much are they going to charge for it? Really? Like that's
Yeah,
going
that's a
to
big
be what
question.
it
Hey,
comes down to an end. And I don't know if they're
yeah,
going to do something where it's like, oh, if your income in the app store is less than kind of what they did with the cut, you know, you only have to pay whatever $5 a month. But if you're a mega enterprise corporation, then you have to pay $25 per user per seat per app or something crazy like
yeah, that
that.
kind of stuff. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so I'll be
I
interested to see how they're going to price that out. And then, yeah, I haven't looked. I want to look at the advanced configuration talk. I haven't looked at it yet, to be honest. But I'm curious about if this stuff can be edited outside of Xcode, because that would be my concern. Is that it's
yeah,
all locked down into a GUI with some god awful XML behind the scenes that's just going to make it really difficult to like can reconfigure when you want to. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah, exactly. Like every time there's a change to the project file, it is almost impossible to read. So
Yeah.
you don't understand what's happening behind the scenes. So hopefully I don't know, maybe they delegate to a JSON file or something like a dedicated file that you can read and understand. That is a big concern for me too.
Yeah. And the other thing too is like what kind of integrations they have, right? Like they mentioned Slack, like what else could there be as far as
Yep.
like what Xcode Cloud integrates with?
Yeah, I was actually researching it yesterday, and I found that just looking at the docs, Xcode Cloud already supports GitHub, Bitbucket, and GitLab, so you
Okay.
can get your source
And
code
that
from
makes
that
sense because
in
that's supported
all
in
the
Xcode natively.
yeah, and in all those configurations like GitHub and GitHub Enterprise, like the self-hosted GitLab, all those kind of things, and then it has 5 webhooks. Let me rephrase it. It supports it exposes webhooks, and you can register 5 of those. I'm not sure why just 5. I think maybe they don't want to open the doors too much while it's still in the beta, right? But so I can imagine. I used to work in a team, and we had this big LED colored light in the office, and whenever the test broke, the light would shine red.
Yeah.
So you can do those sort of things.
Yeah. And then, I mean, so they have said there will be a REST API. We have no clue what it looks like yet. And I mean, Xcode Cloud, for instance, is not even released yet. You have to sign up for the beta. But there will be a REST API. And then what do you think about, I guess, what do you think about it being integrated with Xcode so tightly? Do you think that's a good thing, or could that be a hindrance?
So I made a joke the other day in a talk at the Melbourne Cocoa Head meetup, and it was, would you trust Xcode to do all this for you in the cloud? Those of us who have been working with Xcode for a long time tend to have this love-hate, not trusting too much relationship. Of course, I'm joking, like Apple has a lot of very smart people working on this, and I'm sure they're going to iterate on it and make it really robust. I think if you like Xcode, and there is a certain return of investment in learning all the keyboard shortcut and becoming really comfortable within the IDE and not having to leave it. You are always in the same familiar interface. There is something to be said for the removing this little context switch of UI and tools. At the same time, whenever we see tools that try to do a lot of things, they end up making compromises, they end up being bloated or confusing to use. Apple has a very good track record in doing software that is easy to use and polished with good interfaces, and I think Xcode is doing a good job at it. But look, I'm asking myself, is it just because I'm already comfortable with my workflow where I write in Xcode and I go on GitHub, then I check my CI in whatever service I'm using, that I feel a bit of friction for this? Or is there actually something there? I don't know. I guess we'll have to try.
Right. Yep. That totally makes sense. So before we jump into more of the new stuff that's come out this year, I want to talk about your book. So you have a book coming out, correct?
Yeah. At the end of the month, we'll be releasing test-driven development in Swift. And as far as I know, is the only book that teaches you test-driven development using while building an app, a Swift app with SwiftUI and Combine. And I second guessed myself a few times while writing it. Like, have I shot myself in the foot? Like, I don't know, I'm getting a warning in the console about this layout. What am I doing? Is it gonna change? I kept a very close eye on all the testing news this year because I was very worried that Apple is gonna introduce a completely new version of XCTest that changes everything. The Objective-C to Swift of XCTest and make my book irrelevant already. But no, that wasn't the case. So end of the month, start of July, it's gonna be available on Amazon and on apress.com. That is
awesome.
the publisher. But you will flick a link in the show notes. But yeah, you can find more about it on tddinswift.com.
Yeah, and we'll definitely have a link to that in the show notes. We've done an episode before on TDD with some of the folks from Ray Winderlich, and I can't praise that methodology enough. What is your way of convincing somebody who may be skeptical about TDD to adopt it?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that have been burned by trying test-driven development in a code base that wasn't structured for it. We have an existing code base that hasn't been written with testability in mind, and trying to add a test there for existing code is really painful because there's implicit dependencies in there, global state in the way. So I would definitely say, if you want to try to write tests first, start with new code and become comfortable in that way. A lot of people think that test-driven development is about discovering bugs before they happen, and that is definitely true. But in my opinion, that is not the biggest advantage, the real value of this approach. The real value that I find in test-driven development, the way I am test-infected, the way why I just want to work in this way, is because it allows me to move in small and fast iterations. Even just at the level of a function, I might iterate on its implementation 4 or 5 times while writing it. And I'm quite a lazy developer. I don't like to spin up the app in the simulator and click through all the UI to exercise the code that I want to exercise. And so having a test that calls that new method, that new object that I'm working on is incredibly efficient for me. It really makes you move much faster. So I think that is a somehow not talked about enough value of test-driven development. It can really help you write code in a more pleasurable way because your feedback cycle is so much faster. And then,
well, I was just gonna say, talking about the way it architects your app too. If you're using test-driven development, your code becomes a lot more agile when you want to modify it because you've already tested specific pieces and components of your code, and you've allowed for that agility, hopefully, within your code so that you're testing only the individual pieces and not the whole structure, so to speak. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. There's this phrase that the folks at Thoughtbot, a software agency, that has done a lot of work in the testing space, mainly for Ruby on Rails, that they use, and it is writing tests puts an helpful pressure on your code.
Yeah,
having
exactly.
to write the test for the code forces you to make the code smaller and to avoid implicit dependencies under the hood, because if they're there, you cannot test them. It's sort of like in the book, I try to make a similarity with natural selection. So the organisms that were more fit to survived and thrived. And it's a bit the same with the code when you start writing it with test first. And you want your test to be easy to write and to give you fast feedback, so you're sort of incentivized to find small code that is easy to test in a way that might not be immediately clear when you write just production code, because you have everything accessible and you're testing it through the app that has already instantiated everything. You can access the global state, so you may not realize that you're introducing some source of complexity that is going to give you trouble in the future.
Yeah, exactly. So if it's all right, I want to jump right into the SwiftUI part of your book.
Yeah, sure.
What are some of the challenges that come with doing TDD when it comes to SwiftUI specifically?
Yeah. So I had done a lot of research for the book to put together the proposal, and I had this idea buzzing in my head for a long time, and it was all based on UIKit. And as I said, someone that doesn't like to spin up the app, I had developed all my little tricks, most of which I should say I learned from the community around the internet, right? On how to test the view controllers and UI view subclasses, UI button without spinning them up in the app. And so you kind of develop this way of using test-driven development for the view layer as well. SwiftUI makes this not impossible, but very, very complicated, because if you try to inspect the return value of the body property of a view, of a SwiftUI view at runtime, you get this blob of information described in a way that the SwiftUI runtime understands, but is not really made for developers.
Right,
so,
exactly.
I struggled with that at first, and then I sort of went back to basics and tried to understand the theory behind SwiftUI. So in SwiftUI, the view is a function of the state, and a function of the state means that the view itself is stateless. The view is not an object. If I'm pretty sure that you cannot define a view as a class. The compiler is not going to let you do it. It has to be a struct. It has to be a value type. So in a sense, SwiftUI makes testing easier, because once you decouple the layout definition from all the business logic, all the layout population logic that you write, once you split how the code that tells the view you should be this tall, this large, red here, black there, with the code that tells it, hey, your title is this, and the rows in your list are those, then you can trust that once you give the SwiftUI view that you defined a certain state as its input, it is always going to render that state in the same time. So basically, SwiftUI frees you from all the testing necessity that you had on UIKit, because in UIKit, you were configuring all the view, and it had state and methods that you could call on it. There's none of that in SwiftUI. You declare how the view looks like, and then you feed state into it. And this allows you to write all your tests for the state. So you can iterate very quickly on the layout using previews and using fake data in the preview content, like the fake data that you feed to your preview. And you can iterate on the layout like that. And then you can use test-driven development to implement all the logic that generates the state that you feed to the layout.
Yeah.
So that is really the trick for me, is just letting go of wanting to write a unit test for the view layer.
View. Yeah.
Yeah, and pushing all the intelligence into an isolated object that doesn't depend on SwiftUI. In the book, I call it view model, as not the MVVM architecture, because it's very similar to that. You can give it the name that you want, or you can try to adopt a different architecture. You can call it presenter, data, whatever. Just this logic that generates the state.
Yeah, I mean, you hit it right on the nose. Don't test the view, test the logic that like sets the state. And I think that's where I've found, and I've talked about this in one of my talks about adopting Combine for older like APIs, delegate APIs like court location. And what I've found is like you separate that out, and that's where you use something like Combine, and then you test the Combine publishers to see if the data is correct or whatever you want to use in that case. And I think that's why you kind of get into a lot into your book about testing Combine, and making sure that the publishers and the subscribers and their logic is correct. And, I mean, I don't know. That's what it seems like to me is where a lot of this ends up going, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think with SwiftUI, with Combine, the Apple team has given us, they've taken the burden of making a lot of glue code, a lot of pipings, like the piping that send the water to the house. They are taking care of that, and we can focus on writing our business logic. And is liberating. Like, I can focus on those things and don't worry about it. And actually, to circle back on the test-driven development mindset, or what practicing TDD gives you, that is another benefit that I find in test-driven development. It splits your the way you write code. So test-driven development, you start. I realized I actually haven't described how it works. So you start, when you want to write a piece of code, you first write a test for it. And maybe you have like just the empty implementation for your function, or you don't even have the function. And then the compiler is going to tell you, hey, this function doesn't exist. So you create a function. Once you get the code to compile, your test is going to fail because there's no logic yet in that function. So now your job, the game, is let's make the test pass with the simplest code that we can write. And that code, again, it just the first that comes to mind, it doesn't have to be perfect. You just need to make the test pass. And once the test passes, once it's green, you can change the code real quick and run your test again. And if the test is still passing, then you are reasonably confident that that code works, at least from the point of view of the test. And this is the refactor stage. So red, green, refactor, and then you keep looping around, sort of like a spiral. Red, green, refactor, red, green, refactor, red, green, refactor. Yeah. I was hoping to make the cover of the book a spiral of arrows that go up, but I couldn't.
What is the cover of the book?
So the book itself has a hummingbird in the cover,
Gotcha.
A picture of a hummingbird. That is the branding of the publisher for the Swift Swift series. So yeah, I'm just one of the books in the series, so I didn't have enough clout to demand my own cover.
Next time.
Yeah, next time. But back to the thing. Sorry, I just want to add something else that is important for the listeners. It really splits. You don't have to worry about writing good code when you're trying to make the test pass. You just want to make the test pass. And once you've done that, you can focus on writing good code. And it's surprising how that frees resources in your brain, because you're not trying to do two things at the same time. There's no pressure. I need to write this code perfect, because you just need to make the test pass. And then you can make it perfect.
Yeah. So one of the complaints, and I know the answer to this, but I'm gonna ask you anyway. Gio, my app, it accesses the internet, it accesses the database. How am I supposed to test that? Because if that doesn't work, like my app won't work. Like how do, I'll let you answer that, but I know the answer, but I want to let you handle that one because I think people get really confused and they start getting confused with like integrating with other systems, and it's like,
Yeah,
yeah,
it is a common pain point that I have seen in code bases that started writing tests, but for some reason didn't have access to the resources to learn how to write them in a air quote proper way, in a again air quote better way. It is you should your unit they're called unit tests for a reason. They should really focus on only one thing, or one logical unit, one unit of work of your application. And in particular, when practicing test-driven development, you want your feedback cycle to be as fast as possible. TDD has a lot of techniques and tricks and approaches to make your feedback cycle faster. So having to make an HTTP request to talk with the network and having to deal with the inherent entropy of the world, and your connection might drop, the server might be down, and the same goes for the database. Now we have optimization at the OS level that makes it fast, but you're still reading a file. So those are all things that make your feedback cycle not only slower because you need to do more stuff, but also less reliable because, particularly in the case of the network, there are all these moving parts in between getting a result, asking for information, and getting it back from the server, from the backend, that can break your test and create a source of failure that is outside of your control. So a big part of test-driven development and of the book is around writing code that doesn't directly depend on these, let's call them third parties, and that like the network, you can see it as a third-party dependency of your system, something that is outside of your control.
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, the way we deal with them is with test doubles. So a test double is an object that replicates the functionality of a real-world dependency, but only for the purpose of testing. So you can control.
The term I've heard is mocks. Is that something different?
It depends on who you ask.
Okay.
Okay.
I brought it up.
No, that's a great segue or tangent or rabbit hole to go into. I refer to the terminology defined in the XUnit patterns. It is a book and a website. I'll try to grab a link for the show notes. And test doubles, there is the umbrella term for all the different types of object dedicated for the purpose of testing that you can build. And the mocks are one flavor of test double. Alongside the mocks, we have the stubs, the fakes, the dummies.
Yep.
So there's different types. I covered them in the book.
Fakes, dummies.
Yeah.
Stubs.
Yeah. Because they're very apt names. They give you an idea of what things do. I try to steer away from the term mock because I find it has it's overloaded with meaning and is not clear. What you're actually referring to. In the XUnit patterns terminology, a mock is an object that you use to record the behavior of a dependency. So
Interesting. Okay.
say that
you want to make sure that a certain
you
function had been called when you call another function, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And on top of that, you run assertion on the mock. So let's say that you use this mock to replace the dependency on the network. You would build your object, pass the network mock into it, then act on your object under test, the SCOT, the system under test, and then let it do its thing. And your assertions to know whether the test passed or not would be methods that you call on the mock itself. Something like network mock dot did receive get call with URL, exactly. Something along those lines.
Did make post, and, did make get, did make whatever. Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah. And I feel those add a lot of infrastructure that you need to build, especially in Swift, where we cannot generate mocks at runtime dynamically like you could have done in Objective-C or you doing in Ruby or JavaScript.
Right.
So I try to differentiate between a stub and a spy. So the stub is an object that you use to provide input to the system under test. So again, in the case of testing a network request, and you might want to verify that when the backend sends you an error, you translate it to the appropriate error in the domain of the app. And so you can build a stub, and you can say, hey, stub, return this error, and then feed the stub to your networking client that you're testing. And then the test is at the networking client level. You don't ask the stub, hey, did you get asked for something that returned an error? You just check whether the networking client spits out the error that you expect.
Right. Yep. That makes total sense.
And the spy is the opposite. You use a stub to control the input. You use a spy to record an output.
Okay.
So let's say you have a analytics layer in your app, and you want to make sure that when the user hits the purchase button, an event is logged to your analytics provider. You can replace the real analytics provider code in the test because you don't want to send events from your test. Right. You can replace it with a spy. And that spy, when the certain method to log the event gets called, stores the payload in an instance variable. And then your test would exercise the method that corresponds to the button being pressed, and then check that the payload that the spy recorded has the properties that you expect.
That makes total sense. I didn't know there were so many different types of test doubles, as you refer to them. That's really cool.
Yeah. And important things that I didn't specify while introducing these test doubles is in Swift, they all rely on protocols. And so basically, this is another complaint that you might get. It's like, now I need to define a protocol just for the sake of testing.
Especially from Objective-C, especially for Objective-C folks, because like you said, you can change all that stuff in runtime.
Yeah. And to an extent, it is true that probably if you didn't have to write tests, you wouldn't have defined a protocol to wrap this type. But I would argue that again, tests put an helpful pressure on your code, and having to define protocols for the interfaces between the different layers, the different components of your system, is actually a very good thing to do. It is an implementation of the dependency inversion principle, which says, all right, I hope not to get it wrong. The dependency inversion principle says that higher level modules should not depend on lower level modules. Yeah. They should depend on abstractions. Yep. And that the module should not know about each other. They should just have abstractions in between. The practical advantage of this is that you can change the implementation and even the actual concrete type that you provide to a module seamlessly, transparently, because it is behind this abstraction, this interface, this technical in Swift, this protocol.
Yeah.
And in particular, when it comes to that analytics provider or like your third-party library that does what have you, having your own domain wrapper around it leaves a lot of doors open to you. Because if, I don't know, your analytics provider, Google buys them and they don't work anymore, you can find another one.
And the only thing,
the only thing you need to do is change the implementation behind that protocol. You don't need to update the consuming code.
Right. No, I'm totally on board with protocol-oriented programming, and I feel like that goes hand in hand with this stuff. One of the things I was going to ask was specifically when it comes to Combine, what have you found are some easier ways to do testing in that space when it comes to making sure your publishers and subscribers work out correctly?
Yeah, good question. Nothing comes to mind when it comes to subscribers. I have played around just a tiny bit with them, but for what concerns the publishers, again, you need to understand how they work from the point of view of testing them. And so a publisher, in a sense, is nothing more than an asynchronous piece of code.
Or a series of asynchronous code,
well, it works asynchronous, and it can send out one value or a series of value. From the point of view of testing, you can use your existing toolkit of to test asynchronous code, so all the XCT expectation APIs. And the trick being that you need to subscribe. You need to add your test class as a subscriber of the of your publisher. So in the sync, you add your closure there, and it is in that at that level that you can add your assertion to verify what the publisher is sending to you.
Yeah, and what I've found is like setting it up kind of like what you're saying with protocols, where it's like you want this to create a publisher which will take two inputs and merge them in a specific way. And that's what you want to test. You want to test that merging is done correctly. Not so much like whether the data isn't what you expect. Or, well, I guess the data is what you expect, but you assume that the publisher and the combine works correctly. It's that your math, I guess, your functional programming is correct and how you combine that data. And that's what you want to test.
Absolutely. And you touched a bit on this topic in your episode with, oh gosh, his name escapes me right now.
You better get this right.
Dim sum thinking.
Daniel. Yeah, Daniel Steinberg.
Daniel, there you go. There you go.
He has two books. He has a book on functional programming and on Combine. So, yeah.
Yeah. Daniel is a great writer, a great speaker, a great thinker. I'm so sorry that I sort of blanked on his name right now. I hope if he listens to this, he'll forgive me. I really follow what he writes, and I really like it. And I don't remember if you went into the details in the podcast episode or not, but it goes back a bit to what we said before, that Apple takes care of the plumbing for us.
Right.
So
exactly.
if you can structure the code that uses Combine as a series of steps through pure functions, so through functions that don't depend on global state outside and don't perform side effects, so they don't depend and don't change the global state of the app.
But yeah, I mean, like you're saying, you don't want to test like the plumbing that is going to work when it's if it doesn't work, that's a bug. That's where your feedback assistant comes in.
Yeah,
But
exactly. And it's good to know when something doesn't work, and maybe you can write a test for the workaround that you put in place, but you can't. If it doesn't work, you can't open the source of Combine and fix it. So there's also that lack of agency.
Yeah, I've been in situations, I've done a lot of Combine over the last year or two, and like figuring out that, like running a unit test against my publisher factories, or publicists as I like to call them, to make sure that like, I did a share right, or I did a multicast right, or I did a flat map right. It's super helpful in those cases, and it's really paid off. So I want to ask, there's been a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth on Twitter because we haven't had a Combine talk this year, but we've had a lot on Async and Await. What's your thought on the future of Combine and the future of Async and Await?
That's a great question. I know a lot of folks have mixed feeling about it. I think I'm still in awe for what they've done with the async await pattern and how it simplifies so many things in dealing with asynchronous code.
Oh yeah,
that
totally.
I haven't spent enough time thinking how is the code that we're going to write looking in the future. I have a feeling that there is still a space for Combine, so that Combine is not going to go anywhere because. Look, I haven't gotten my hands dirty with async await other than trying to understand how to write tests for code written this way.
Yeah.
But there is structured concurrency, and you can have like again concurrent async requests piece of code running at the same time. But it didn't seem to me like it solved the same problem that Combine does, and that is putting together possibly multiple streams of events over time and piping them through and do all this very neat functional chaining of pure function and data transformations that we just talked about. So
I feel like there's still async and await is about the one-off, like I want to make one networking call. I don't need to like do a bunch of plumbing like Combine gives me. And that's where I feel like it really makes sense. And I feel like Combine is really all about that. Like you said, multiple streams of data, reactive programming, that kind of stuff. That's where really Combine fits in. I don't know what, to be honest with you, I haven't gone into like a WWDC year since Combine's been introduced wanting something. Like, I don't know what is missing from Combine that we're expecting from Apple. Like I feel like Combine pretty much does everything I want it to do, and if it doesn't, it's not that hard to make something
to make it happen.
Right.
Yeah. I think we are definitely in a what a time to be alive. We have all these great tools. And Swift is so versatile while at the same time being so safe, thanks to the compiler and the type system, that someone that leans more towards the functional programming style can write an app in Swift in that way with ease. And the same goes for someone that he maybe likes more just straight old straight object-oriented programming. And the two things can live at the same time in maybe not in the same app, but in the same Swift ecosystem because the language has all the tools to do it.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. It depends on it's an it depends question in its most it depends way, where it's like it depends what situation you're in. Like, do you need the reactive plumbing, or do you need like just an actor type with like async and await and all that stuff? It really does depend on the situation.
Yeah. It's the story of software development, right? It's always it depends.
It depends. Yeah. I mean, the thing I think that, has come out over the last few days is that if you're doing anything on an older platform that's not going to be coming out in fall, you cannot do async and await. So
Yeah.
that's where okay, maybe it's worth doing combined. What I think puzzles me is okay, what if you write an app that you want to support, or even a Swift package that you want to support the older platforms? What can you do to still use async and await and somehow have some scaffolding so that you can use you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It can get really messy. So I think those are my concerns more with async and await than actually async and await.
Yeah, a friend of mine here in Melbourne has been working on a library. It's called Combine Asyncually, I think. We'll find a link again, and which is sort of helps you wrap async calls into Combine. I'm guessing publisher, into sort of lift them to
nice.
the Combine land. He demonstrated yesterday at this meetup that I attended, and big disclaimer: this is all beta code. Is likely they already announced a change in the syntax to something that you are in this beta calling with async curly braces. You'll call with task dot async, or maybe just task curly braces. So it is maybe the early days of Swift, where it was
totally.
the syntax was
just
changing
constantly.
Beta after beta. So
have you looked at any of the testing stuff when it comes to async and await?
Yeah, I actually published a post a few days ago, and it is so something interesting for testing asynchronous code in XCTest is there are all these APIs. You kind of need to trick the test runner into wait for your code, but not stop the thread with a sleep, because otherwise your code doesn't run.
Right.
Whereas because async await is built in the language, the way you write a test for some async call is you just call it with try await, like you would do in production. So testing asynchronous code in the async await world is not something that you would Google anymore, because you just do it the same way that you write asynchronous code in production. Is very
awesome.
straightforward.
Yeah, that's really
very
awesome.
great.
You don't have to do the wait for expectations and all that stuff.
No, you just let result equal try await function that spits a result.
Is there a timeout though? What if it never finishes?
I don't know. This is a question that has come up a few times, and I don't have an answer for that.
Yeah.
I tried. There's an example in the documentation for async await to sleep to add a delay in the function that is asynchronous, and I put that code in my Xcode and the code crashed. So I don't know. I don't know what happens. I assume there's gonna be some timeout at some point.
Right. Yeah.
There are.
Or task has a timeout property to it or something, so that way you can specify when it just fails because it never finishes. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure there is something like that, and I just don't know where it is.
Right.
In the unlikely occurrence that there isn't, I would say there isn't yet, because a lot of people are asking this question. So, if there isn't yet, Apple is gonna build something for that for sure.
Yeah. So, one of the talks I looked at today was the one on expecting failures. I don't know if you've seen this. But this is really cool. So I'm in the process of updating some old Objective-C code and moving it over to Swift and kind of setting up that scaffolding. And some of it's not done. Okay. But the idea that I could at least have this write the test and expect the failure knowing that I'm
Yeah.
not like you said, kind of in that first step of TDD, but then still let the CI go on is really interesting. I mean, that's what it seems like is the use case, is if you're like in the middle of a feature, you can have the expect failure and it's not going to like cancel out the whole test. Is that correct?
Yeah. Expect failure is a super neat API.
And
If
I
you
want to
dig into the
just
document,
say it's available now. Like you don't need a beta for it. It's in 12.5,
yeah,
which is awesome.
yeah, is one of those ones that they sneak into in the like latest version of Xcode, but they announce WWDC. It is very versatile, and if you look at the header and the documentation, the type signature of that, because there are different versions of XCT expect failure. So what it does, it allows you to, it tells the test runner to expect a failure. So if the test fails, Xcode is not gonna mark that test as a failure. It's gonna mark it as a known failure. Visually, it appears as so a failed test as the red diamond with the white X inside.
Right.
This is a grayed out version of that diamond, and it looks similar to the skipped test, but the skipped test has like a jumping arrow, and this one has just the X of the failure. And something cool is
awesome.
By default, that visual component, there is some research that I saw a long time ago, and that I can't really find a link for right now. But there is some research that says like, the red makes you like uncomfortable in a way that pushes you to you want to make it green as soon as you can. There is something to it, and the gray I find is very appropriate as a middle ground,
neutral.
Yeah. If your test in which you defined that you should declare that you're expecting a failure actually doesn't fail, so if the test passes,
this is cool.
The expect failure is gonna fail. So this is a bit it is very confusing to say, but like when you see it, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense because it makes you to move it and get rid of that expect failure, and now you have a working test. That's awesome.
Yeah, and that is really in line with the idea that tests are a living documentation of your understanding of what the system does. And when a test fails, is a signal to the developer that there is a discrepancy between what the system does and what they declared it should do through the test.
Yep.
And that is that failure.
Yep.
There are.
No, go ahead.
Okay. There are a few more advanced, maybe not advanced, but like a few more configuration that you can use XCT expect failure with. So we just said that it's going to fail if the test passes, but you can disable this strict mode. So if you're dealing with a flaky test that you don't have the time to fix right now, but you don't want the entire test suite to fail because of that, you can expect the failure, but not in strict mode, so that if it passes, is okay. We knew it was a flaky test. You can also drill down into the failure. The type itself is an XCT issue that XCT test received at runtime. To maybe you want to check that the error message, the failure message rather, that you received is the one that you expect, because otherwise it could be a different kind of failure that you didn't know about.
Right. Yeah.
And you can also wrap code that throws into an XCT expect failure, so that because otherwise the throwing mechanic is a bit different from usual test failure. So you can handle that as well. Now, there is one concern that I have with this incredibly neat API, and it sounds like almost too powerful in a sense. I fear that it is going to be easy to misuse it and just log a lot of technical debt, a lot of XCT expect failure in your code base. So the example that you gave,
folks could just comment out their tests. Like, let's be honest.
Yeah,
like,
exactly. It is true.
That's already
It's
been
like
there. So, like, yeah, I mean, if you
definitely.
really want to go and do expect failure, like, okay, like if you don't want to do commenting out, okay, like, yeah, there's going to be, when there's laziness, there's laziness. There's nothing that's going to get around that.
It is true. You called out my straw man argument. It's true. There were already ways to forget about tests.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Did you want to talk about test repetitions or test plans before we close out?
Yeah, sure. Test repetition are pretty cool too. It is another feature that again could be misused. Because it allows you to just what is test repetition? Test repetition is a new configuration option in a test plan. So test plan is a scheme on steroids. Is definition of you can. So out of the box, Xcode will create a test target, and you can run the test through a scheme. And in the scheme, you can enable a few options like run your test in random order, which I really recommend. You can disable a few tests that you may want to run. There's a few configurations that you can do that. The test plan allows you to add more configurations. So you can run your test through the same plan. You can run them in one locale, you can run them in a different locale, you can simulate certain condition. And now with Xcode 13, you can add the test repetitions. So there are 4 test repetition mode. One is none, so just run them and tell me what they did. The other one is until failure. So it's gonna run your test up to 3 times until one fails. This is useful to discover flaky test. So I would say if you have in particular a UI test suite, it might be handy to have maybe a CI task that once a day runs it through the repeat until failure configuration, just to be sure that is robust. Then there is the repeat on failure mode, which is the exact opposite. If one test fails, it's gonna run it again. And this is useful when you have flaky tests, and either they are inherently flaky. Maybe you have an integration test suite that is talking with the network, and sometimes it might fail. Or when you know that they're there, but you don't have the time to fix them, and you don't want them to be a blocker for some CI pipeline where they are. The final one is repeat until maximum repetition. So again, it is going to run your test 3 times, regardless of the result, and it's going to tell you, hey, 2 out of 3 passed, that's 67%. And that is useful, I think, to diagnose, to triage a fix for a flaky test. You say, hey, I think I fixed it. Let's run it a bunch of times to see if it's actually stable. One thing I'll say is 3 times is not that statistically relevant. Is just 3 times. I dealt with flaky tests that I had to run 20 times to get one failure out of them. So I hope they'll give us a way in the future to bump that number up.
So it's locked to 3?
Yeah, as far as I could see in Xcode 13.0 beta 1, that number is grayed out. So the UI didn't let you change it. I have to say I didn't look into the test plan file itself to see if maybe you can change it from there. I'll have to look into that later.
That's really interesting. Okay. Wow, we've covered a lot today. Thank you so much for coming on, Gio. It's really been great. And I'm so glad to have somebody come on and cover this important topic about TDD and SwiftUI and Combine. Where can people find you?
My landing page on the internet is gio.codes. That's gio.codes, C-O-D-E-S.
I love it.
I blog at mokacoding.com. I won't spell it because it'd be too long. And you can find me on Twitter at mokagio, M-O-K-A-G-I-O.
And the name of the book is TDD and Swift, correct?
Yeah, I think Google would find it if you do TDD and Swift. The the actual name is Test-Driven Development in Swift, just to be,
And we'll have a
verbose
link.
and have.
We'll have the link in the show notes. Do you have any? I have to ask. Do you have any promo codes for any of our audience?
No, I because I'm not self-publishing. I'm going through a publisher.
Okay.
I don't have access to promo codes, but I have a page. I'll send you the link where you can sign up and receive some bonus content about the book.
Awesome. That'd be fantastic. Thank you so much. We really appreciate that.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. When's the release date?
It is you caught me by surprise. The ebook is going to be out on the 3rd of July.
Wow,
and
awesome.
The paperback should be out on the 23rd of June, but that may depend on where you are in the world.
Okay.
We are just finalizing, doing the last fixes in the proofs, and depends on where you are in the world.
Thank you so much. This is exciting. It's really exciting. This is your first book, right?
It is. Yeah, it's
awesome.
Been a process.
Well, thank you again for coming on the show.
Thank you, Leo.
People can find me on Twitter at LeoGDion. My business is Bright Digit. Please take some time to subscribe and like on YouTube if you're watching on there, or give us a review on Google Podcasts or Apple Podcasts. I have to remember what they call it right now. Spotify, Audible, wherever you're listening to it. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. Please take some time to fill out our audience survey too. I'd really appreciate that. You'll see a link in the show notes. Thank you so much, and I look forward to talking to you again. Bye.